Welcome back, Love Nation. This is Nina. Make sure you guys like, share, and subscribe. Thank you to everybody that has been coming to my channel. Like this video, share this video, and hit that notification bell so you guys know when I drop my next one. We are now on Chapter 11 of reading the amended Diddy lawsuit, in which now other celebrities are now being known to the public. And we are again on Chapter 11. Leave your comments below. I definitely want to know what you guys think about this. We are near the end, and thank you to everybody that has been reading this with me. We are almost at the end, and let's go with Chapter 11 of the amended lawsuit. Next section, 12th cause of action, negligent infliction of emotional distress. Plaintiffs against all defendants. Plaintiffs incorporate by reference and reallege each of the proceedings paragraphs and all paragraphs below, as though fully set forth and brought in cause of action. Defendants were negligent by both conspiring to and each breaching the duty of care they owed to plaintiff to keep her safe, and by breaching their duty to properly supervise and control defendants within the Diddy cover-up. Plaintiffs suffer physical injuries, severe mental and emotional distress, pain and suffering, mental anguish, and loss of enjoyment of life. Defendants' negligence were a substantial factor in causing plaintiffs to suffer physical injuries and severe mental and emotional distress, pain and suffering, mental anguish, and loss of enjoyment of life. Next section, 13th cause of action, unjust enrichment. Plaintiffs against defendants Shane, KK, Pelletier, Valdez, Brandy, Druski, Helena, Odell, Big Homie CC, Jaguar, and the John Does. Plaintiffs incorporate by reference and reallege each of the proceedings, paragraphs and all paragraphs below, as though fully set forth and brought in cause of action. Defendant Shane received significant revenue, specifically a new car for his betrayal and his involvement in plaintiff's SA, and his role in Diddy's abuse cover-up. Defendants Pelletier, Valdez, KK, Brandy, Alina, Jaguar, the John Does received revenue in the form of cash payments for their involvement in plaintiff Doe's battery, SA, false imprisonment, and his role in the Diddy cover-up. Other defendants named herein received significant revenue for their involvement in plaintiffs' SA and their roles in the Diddy cover-up. Defendants appreciate and have acknowledged of such benefits and retain them to this day. Under principles of equity and good conscience, defendants should not be permitted to retain the profit they received and retained at plaintiff's expense while refusing to provide compensation for the injuries suffered by plaintiff as a result of their unlawful conduct, including their failure to guard against, educate as to, or otherwise failure to prevent such injuries inflicted on plaintiffs. Under principles of equity and good conscience, defendants should not be permitted to retain the profit they received and retained at plaintiff's expense while refusing to provide compensation for the injuries suffered by plaintiff as a result of their unlawful conduct as members of Diddy's enterprise. Plaintiffs seek restitution and or disgorgement of all monies defendants have unjustly received and retained as a result of their unlawful conduct and participation in Diddy's SA and cover-up alleged herein. Next section, 14th cause of action, aiding and abetting, plaintiffs against all defendants. Plaintiffs incorporate by reference and reallege each of the proceedings, paragraphs and all paragraphs below, as though fully set forth and brought in cause of action. Defendants knew that an SA was being committed and was going to be committed against plaintiffs because of defendants' involvement in the Diddy SA and cover-up. Defendants provided pharmaceuticals to be used to take advantage of plaintiffs without the knowledge or consent of plaintiffs. Defendants knew plaintiffs have been and would be SA'd because of their involvement in Diddy's cover-up. Defendant's conduct was a substantial factor in causing harm to plaintiffs. Through the aforementioned acts, defendants caused plaintiffs an imminent apprehension of harmful or offensive contact with an intimate part of plaintiff's body, and SA contact with plaintiffs resulted. As a result of defendants' conduct, plaintiffs have suffered economic injury. Plaintiffs' general, special, and consequential damages are in an amount to be proven at trial, but in no event is less than the minimum jurisdictional amount of this court. As a result of defendants' above described conduct, plaintiffs have suffered and continue to suffer great emotional distress and was prevented and will continue to be prevented from performing daily activities and obtaining the full enjoyment of life. As described in this complaint, the defendant's conduct was done with oppression, fraud, and or malice, warranting significant damage, including punitive damages. Here, plaintiffs were SA'd by defendants Diddy, Shane, Odell, Druski, Valdez, and John Doe at defendant Shane's residence. Plaintiff was legally on the premise as a guest and invitee of defendant Shane. Defendant Shane, through renting the premises, had domination and control over the premises where plaintiff was harmed. Diddy had dominion and control over the actions of defendants Shane, Odell, Druski, and John Doe, and failed to step in and stop them from S.A.ing Ashley P. As the owner of the property, defendant Shane had a duty to protect plaintiff from the harm she suffered at the hands of defendant Diddy, Odell, Druski, and Doe, and breached his duty when he failed to stop them from essaying plaintiff Ashley P. In furtherance of this breach, defendant Shane encouraged defendant Diddy, Odell, Druski, and John Doe to continue their SA on plaintiff. Plaintiff has suffered immensely because of defendant Shane's intentional breach of his duty to her. Plaintiff Doe were battered, SA'd, and assaulted by defendants Diddy, Pelletier, Gonzalez, and Valdez at defendant Shane's residence. Plaintiffs were legally on the premises as they were held against their will and forcefully brought there. Defendant Shane, through renting the premises, had dominion and control over the premises where plaintiffs were harmed. Defendant Diddy had dominion and control over the actions of defendant Shane, Odell, Druski, Pelletier, Gonzalez, Valdez, and John Doe, and failed to step in and stop them from SA'ing and battering plaintiffs. As the owner of the property, defendant Shane had a duty to protect plaintiffs from the harm they suffered at the hands of defendants Diddy, Pelletier, Gonzalez, and Valdez, and breached his duty when he failed to stop them from what happened. In furtherance of this breach, defendant Shane encouraged defendants to continue their SAs on plaintiffs. Plaintiffs have suffered immensely because of defendant Shane's intentional breach of his duty to them. As a result of said breach of his duty, plaintiffs have suffered and continues to suffer harm, including severe emotional distress, anxiety, and other consequential damages for which they are entitled to an award of monetary damage and other relief. Defendants' conduct described above as willful, wanton, and malicious. At all relevant times, defendants acted in conscious disregard for plaintiffs' rights and feelings, acted with knowledge of or with reckless disregard for the fact that their conduct was certain to cause injury to plaintiffs, and intended to cause fear, physical injury, and or pain and suffering to plaintiffs. By virtue of the foregoing, plaintiffs are entitled to recover punitive damages. Next section, 15, Cause of Action, Trafficking and Victims Protection Act. Plaintiffs against all defendants. Plaintiffs incorporate by reference and reallege each of the proceedings paragraphs and all paragraphs below as though fully set forth and brought in cause of action. Defendants knowingly and intentionally participated in what happened that was in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce, commerce together with others in violation of USC Section 18, 1590. Among other things, defendants knowingly and intentionally recruited, enticed, provided, obtained, advertised, and solicited by various means plaintiffs, knowing that defendants would use means of force, threats of force, fraud, coercion, and a combination of such means to cause plaintiffs to engage in non-consensual adult acts. Defendants had actual knowledge that they were perpetrating and facilitating Diddy's S.A. conspiracy to recruit, solicit, entice, coerce, harbor, transport, obtain, and provide plaintiffs into non-consensual S.A. through the means of force, threats, fraud, abuse of process, and coercion. Despite such knowledge, defendants intentionally paid for, facilitated, perpetrated, and participated in defendant Diddy's violations of USC Section 18, 1590, which defendants knew and were in reckless disregard of the fact that defendant Diddy would coerce, defraud, and force plaintiffs to engage in non-consensual acts. Defendants' actions were in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce. By taking the concrete steps alleged in this complaint, defendants knowingly participated in traffic and furthered the Diddy S.A. cover-up. The concrete steps constituted taking parts in said traffic venture and were necessary for its success. The concrete steps constituted active engagement by defendants in Diddy's S.A. and cover-up. Defendants knew that its active engagement would lead to and cause said actions. Defendants' affirmative conduct was committed knowingly and in reckless disregard of the facts that defendant Diddy would use his means and influence to force and intimidate plaintiffs in engaging into such said acts. Defendants' conduct was outrageous and intentional. Defendants knowingly and intentionally conduct has caused plaintiff serious harm, including without limitation, physical, psychological, emotional, financial, and reputational harm. Defendants' knowing and intentional conduct has caused plaintiff harm that is sufficiently serious under all surrounding circumstances to compel a reasonable person of the same background and in the same circumstance to perform or to continue performing non-consensual said acts to avoid incurring further harm. Defendants' criminal conduct in perpetrating TVPA violations was outrageous and intentional because it was in deliberate furtherance of a widespread and dangerous criminal organization. Defendants' criminal conduct also convinced a high degree of moral turpitude and demonstrated such wanton dishonesty as to imply a criminal indifference to civil obligations. Defendant's criminal conduct was directed specifically at plaintiff, who was the victim of Diddy, and what happened. Defendant's outrageous and intentional conduct in this case is part of a pattern and practice of profiteering by undertaking illegal, high-risk, high-reward actions by virtue of these knowing and intentional violations of USC 18, Section 1590 and 1595. Defendants are liable to plaintiff for the damages they sustained and reasonable attorney fees. By virtue of these intentional and outrageous violations of 18 USC 1590 and 1595, defendants are liable to plaintiff. I will end Chapter 11 right here, and we will pick up again with Chapter 12 very shortly. Leave your comments below respectfully. Like, share, and subscribe. Thumbs up this video. Until next time, be safe and enjoy your night. Bye, guys.